Imagine something that feels impossible. A world still full of prayer. A world with temples, clergy, rituals, and sacred names, and yet Allah does not send a single new message for 600 years. No prophet living among people. No revealed voice arriving to correct, to warn, to say, "You have drifted too far." This is not 600 years of total silence. This is 600 years of hearing plenty of voices, but no longer hearing the voice of truth. People still live, still love, still struggle, still worship. But deep down, something has been lost. Not belief, but the compass of belief. Not religion, but the living breath of revelation. And when that breath is gone, faith slowly becomes a shell and worship turns into an empty routine. Put yourself in that era, but you are born into a world where the teachings of earlier prophets are still mentioned, but they have been cut off from their source. Each generation adds another layer of interpretation. Each power adds another layer of self-interest. Each community keeps what benefits them and ignores what demands responsibility, sacrifice, and justice. The truth does not disappear, but it gets buried under too many voices claiming to speak for the truth. And then the most frightening thing begins to happen. People do not realize they are lost. They think they are on the right path because everyone is walking that way. They think they are worshiping because the rituals still happen on schedule. They think they are serving Allah, while in reality they are serving fear, tribal honor, power, money, and the intermediaries they built with their own hands. And this is no longer a loud darkness. It is a massive spiritual void where people believe they are being guided when in fact no one is guiding them. Inside that void, human history enters its most dangerous stage. Not because knowledge is missing, but because knowledge is no longer anchored to revelation. Not because people have no morals, but because there is no longer a sacred standard to define morality. Everything becomes relative. Anything can be justified. And then what is right is no longer decided by Allah, it is decided by whoever is stronger. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained. In this video, we are stepping into a period history rarely describes in full. 600 years with no prophet living among humanity. An era when the world looked familiar with faith, but was actually dying slowly in sacred emptiness. But before we go any further, stop for a moment and ask yourself, if today every guiding voice disappeared, if there were no revelation left to correct people, if every group defined truth according to its own interests, how different would our world be from that era? That question is why you should stay until the end of this video. Because that 600-year period is not only a story from the past, it is a mirror held up to human nature when it is no longer being led by the light of revelation. And the deeper you go, the more you will realize something unsettling. Humanity's greatest darkness is not when people stop believing, but when they believe in the wrong direction. If you value the history of the prophets, if you want to understand why the arrival of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, none was not a random event, but the answer to a deep thirst inside all of humanity, please subscribe to Prophetic History Explained right now. Your support is what keeps us going, so we can continue bringing stories that are this profound, this honest, and this awakening about the sacred history of humankind. And now, let's continue. Because to understand the light, we first have to be brave enough to stare into the depth of the darkness. When the void of revelation stretches on, people do not remain simply empty. They start filling that emptiness with whatever they already have in their hands. And from that moment, a dangerous drift begins. People no longer wait for guidance from Allah. They design the path of faith around their own fears and desires. The irony is that belief does not disappear. It shows up everywhere. Temples rise, Eid rituals continue. Prayers are spoken every day. But instead of leading people into humility and wakefulness, faith slowly gets reshaped into a system of control. Allah is no longer at the center. The center becomes power, status, and the sense of safety people chase in an unstable world. Without a living prophet to correct them, people begin creating intermediaries. They do not return directly to Allah. They place their trust in symbols, in clergy, in classes of people who claim the right to interpret divine will. At first, these intermediaries look like helpers, a way to make God feel more accessible. But over time, they become a wall between the human heart and Allah. Faith shifts from a living relationship into dependence. People stop asking how they are living in front of Allah. Instead, they worry about whether they followed the ritual correctly, whether they obeyed the right rules, whether they kept the right form. Religion stops being a path that frees the soul. It becomes a burden of fear and blind compliance. In that environment, people do not only worship Allah, they also worship whatever they believe can protect them. And idols are not only stone statues or visible images. The greatest idols are the concepts people build and bow to without realizing it. Honor, power, bloodline, wealth, fate. Each community has its own fear, and from that fear it creates its own protector. Some begin believing wealth decides a person's worth. Others believe tribe and lineage give them the right to dominate. Some communities convince themselves that unseen forces have already decided everything, so they can abandon moral responsibility. Faith is broken into fragments, and each fragment serves a specific worldly interest. The most dangerous part is not that people worship many things. The most dangerous part is that Allah is pushed farther and farther away from real life. His name is still spoken, but His presence is missing from how people treat one another. They ask Allah for help inside places of worship, then walk outside and oppress the weak without feeling any contradiction. They speak in Allah's name to justify injustice, war, and exploitation. When faith is separated from ethics, religion becomes a dangerous weapon. It can convince people they are doing what is right even while committing evil. It can make the powerful feel chosen and the weak feel like they were born to be crushed. And once that happens, corruption is no longer individual. It becomes a system. Theological arguments spread everywhere. People fight over the nature of God, the status of sacred figures, abstract ideas that few can connect to daily life anymore. The arguments multiply, but hearts move farther from Allah. Religious knowledge stops producing humility and starts feeding arrogance. Everyone believes they own the truth, and they are ready to erase others in the name of that truth. At the same time, rituals that were meant to remind people of Allah become performance. People compete to display devotion, measuring faith by outward appearance. The quiet sincerity of the heart becomes less valuable than the gaze of the crowd. And so religion, the thing that was meant to lead people inward, pulls them away from themselves. When people create false gods, they do not only distort faith, they lose spiritual freedom. They live afraid of breaking a ritual, afraid of being rejected, afraid of punishment from forces they do not even understand. Faith stops bringing peace and starts feeding anxiety. It is no longer trust in Allah, but fear of a sacred world built by human hands. And in that drift, humanity falls deeper into crisis. Because when Allah is no longer the center, every standard begins to shake. Right and wrong are no longer defined by revelation, but by whoever has the power to interpret. Corruption stops being an exception. It becomes normal. People grow used to a faith that does not save, a religion that does not purify, and a spiritual life with no guiding light. That is the picture of a world that believes intensely but believes in the wrong place. And from that misdirection of faith, brutal consequences in society begin to form step by step, generation by generation, like a long slide downward that no one is awake enough to stop. When faith slips away from its center, the damage does not stay inside doctrine and ritual. It spreads into the way people see one another. until human dignity, the most sacred gift Allah places in every soul, begins to peel away from society. Not in a single day and not through one dramatic decision, but through countless small habits repeated until they feel normal. A human being is no longer valued for righteousness or awareness of the Creator, but for status, strength, and usefulness. A person stops being a soul that deserves honor and becomes a tool for labor, for reproduction, for protecting tribal pride, and for maintaining an order built by the powerful. In that world, the weakest lose their voice first. Women are not treated as full human beings, but as property that can be exchanged, transferred, inherited. Their worth is not connected to character or intelligence, but to how well they serve the interests of family and tribe. The right to choose their own lives becomes a luxury, and silence is treated like a forced virtue. Children, who should be symbols of hope, are judged through cold calculation. A child is kept or discarded not because life is sacred, but because that life is seen as useful or not. Once a society loses the sense that every life is a gift from Allah, taking life becomes something people can justify. And when that happens long enough, the collective conscience hardens, and the people trapped in slavery are the clearest evidence of dignity collapsing. They are bought and sold like merchandise, priced like possessions, stripped of control over their own bodies and futures. Society forgets they are also souls created with the same dignity before Allah. The moment a society accepts that one human being can own another, the moral boundary has been erased. Even family, which should be a place of safety and mercy, becomes twisted. It stops being where people learn responsibility and compassion, and becomes a unit built to protect honor and power. Tribal pride becomes more valuable than life. A single insult can lead to bloodshed across generations. Revenge is not a choice, it is a duty. And inside that cycle, people grow up not to live better, but to continue a war they never chose. In that kind of society, mercy becomes dangerous. Forgiveness is treated like weakness. Patience is mistaken for inviting more violence. People learn to be hard to survive, to hide feelings to avoid pain, to ignore the suffering of others to protect themselves. And little by little, cruelty becomes acceptable. The most terrifying part is not a single cruel act, but the way cruelty becomes normal. When a child grows up in a world where injustice feels ordinary, where the strong are always right, where the cries of the weak are never answered, that child carries those values into adulthood. Evil does not always need to be taught. It only needs to go unchallenged. When dignity is no longer anchored to a sacred standard, society begins sliding according to the logic of benefit. Whoever produces value is valuable. Whoever does not is pushed aside. And the elderly become burdens when they cannot contribute. The poor become invisible because they have nothing to trade. Their existence stops being a shared responsibility and becomes their own problem. And here is the deepest consequence of losing revelation. People stop seeing Allah in one another. When divine light no longer shapes how we treat other human beings, relationships become fragile and conditional. Respect is no longer automatic. It has to be earned through power, wealth, or status. Dignity does not collapse in a single moment. It is worn down day by day, generation by generation, until society forgets there was ever a time when humans were seen as equal souls before Allah. And when that memory fades, the world enters a dangerous state, a state where violence no longer shocks anyone, injustice is no longer questioned, even the pain of others no longer stirs the conscience. And from that collapse, larger systems begin to form. Economics, politics, law, all built on a crooked foundation. When people are no longer sacred, no system can truly be just. That is when the entire human order begins to reveal how deeply it has failed. When human dignity is eroded, the structures people build keep running and some even expand. but they become hollow in the most dangerous way. Economics, politics, knowledge, science, all still exist, but they stop serving people as tools for good. They become machines that run for themselves without any sacred moral anchor. Economics becomes a race to accumulate without end. Wealth is no longer seen as a trust. It becomes proof of personal worth. The rich grow richer not because they lift society, but because they control how profit moves. The poor are not only lacking resources, they are trapped inside systems designed to keep them trapped. Exploitation, fraud, and market manipulation stop being shameful and start being praised as cleverness in a brutal competition. When economics is no longer watched by conscience, it begins producing injustice as a system. People are judged by their ability to generate profit, not by character. Labor is drained, but wealth does not return to heal society. The gap between those living in luxury and those fighting just to survive widens until the two worlds barely touch. In that environment, politics does not correct injustice. It becomes the shield that protects it. Power is not understood as responsibility before Allah and the community, but as privilege. Rulers do not feel accountable to a higher standard. They focus on holding their position through fear and favoritism. Law exists, but it is not equal. The strong escape consequences while the weak carry the full weight. When true justice is missing, people lose faith in social order. Without believing justice is real, they turn to violence, bribery, or blind obedience as the only ways to survive. Politics stops being the place where people search for shared solutions and becomes a battlefield of interests, where the voice of the many is drowned out by the power of a few. Knowledge and scholarship, which should be a guiding light, also get trapped in that spiral. Knowledge is fragmented, locked away, turned into a tool of monopoly. Those who know do not share to lift their communities, but to protect their status. The understanding is no longer used to free people from fear and superstition, and sometimes it even strengthens them. The line between scientific observation and fantasy blurs, and people can no longer tell what is natural law and what is built by imagination and fear. Medicine exists, but without mercy. Illness becomes more than physical pain, it becomes a social sentence. The poor cannot access care, and mental illness is treated like punishment or possession. When science is not anchored to the sacred value of life, it becomes cold and discriminatory. Even the relationship between people and nature reflects the failure. The natural world is no longer seen as a sign of wisdom and order placed by Allah, but as a warehouse of resources to extract. Land is exhausted, water is poisoned, animals are treated cruelly. The people lose the awareness that they are caretakers, not absolute owners. And when balance is broken, the consequences do not always arrive immediately. They build quietly until they cannot be reversed. The point is that none of these systems collapse because humans lack intelligence. They collapse because humans lack moral direction. People know a great deal, but they do not know why they know. They have tools, but no purpose beyond short-term gain. They build complex structures, but forget the basic question: who is this serving and by what standard? When Allah is no longer the center, every system begins orbiting itself. Economics serves economics, politics serves politics, knowledge serves knowledge. Human beings are pushed to the margins, managed, exploited, controlled. And there is no shared principle strong enough to force these systems to stop and question themselves. And inside that full picture of failure, a deep exhaustion spreads. Not only exhaustion from poverty or war, but exhaustion from meaninglessness. People begin to realize that no matter how much they gain, conquer, or study, something inside them stays empty. Systems promise order and prosperity, but they do not give peace. That is when history stands at a turning point. When the limits of human-made solutions are exposed, when no structure can heal society at its roots, a quiet question begins to rise inside humanity. Is there another way? A way not born from human ambition, but from the guidance of the one who created human beings? That question becomes the doorway to what comes next. In the moment darkness reaches its lowest point and the world begins to be prepared for a light that does not come from power but from revelation. When darkness spreads into every corner of life, something that feels almost like a paradox begins to appear. The darkness itself becomes exhausting. People no longer believe the systems they built can save them. Not because they lack strength, but because those systems have proven that the harder they run, the farther people drift from one another, the emptier they become, the more anxious they feel. And in that moment, when hope in humanity reaches its final limit, the world begins to be prepared for something else. That preparation does not come with grand announcements or dramatic events. It happens quietly, almost invisibly. In a world loud with power, war, and conflict, Allah allows signs of preparation to appear softly, like underground streams running beneath dry ground. In a society overflowing with idols and intermediaries, some people still refuse to bow to what they know is false. They do not have new revelation. They do not have detailed law to lean on, but their hearts will not settle for worshiping what human hands have built. They seek silence. They step away from the crowd. They try to hold on to a vague but sincere belief in the One. They are not enough to transform society, but they are enough to keep the flame of pure monotheism from going out completely. At the same time, the language of a harsh, dry land is being refined to an uncommon level. People can express complex ideas with speech. They can carve emotion and meaning into just a few lines. They love words, honor words, and memorize rhythms. They do not realize their gift with language is being prepared to carry a message beyond anything they can imagine. Trade routes stretching through desert and mountains are also part of the design. They exist for economic exchange, for moving goods, but they end up connecting communities, cultures, and ways of thinking. People grow used to traveling far, meeting strangers, listening, adapting. When the time comes, those roads will carry more than merchandise. They will carry a message that can cross tribal and racial boundaries. Meanwhile, the empires that once looked unstoppable begin cracking from the inside. Long wars drain resources. Accumulated injustice weakens loyalty. Power is no longer seen as the symbol of order, but as the source of suffering. Those empires still look strong on the outside, but inside they are tired, ready to collapse in front of a new order that is more just and more meaningful. The most important part is not the weakness of old powers, but the shift inside the human heart. After trying every path drawn by human hands and watching those paths fail, people start asking different questions. Not who is stronger, but what is more right. Not how to dominate, but how to live with meaning. A quiet hunger spreads, the hunger to be guided by something higher than interest, fear, and personal ambition. At this point, the darkness is no longer rebellion. It is burnout. And that burnout becomes the reason the light, when it comes, is not rejected. The world is too tired to keep believing in itself as the ultimate savior. It is ready to listen to a different voice, a voice not built from power or wealth, but from revelation. When a child is born in Mecca, the great empires do not notice. There is no political signal, no military shift, no announcement that shakes the world. But in the divine order, that moment marks the end of a long night. 6 centuries of waiting was not abandonment. It was preparation on every level for a message deep enough, wide enough, and strong enough to touch every part of human life. That light does not come to patch one broken system. It comes to redefine everything from the roots: faith, dignity, justice, knowledge, responsibility, and purpose. It does not only answer who to worship, it also answers how to live. And that is why it does not arrive earlier, and it does not arrive later. It arrives at the exact moment the world no longer has the strength to resist the truth. The deepest darkness is not the end, and it is the moment right before dawn. And when that dawn breaks, it does not only push back the darkness of one land or one people, it opens a new chapter for all humanity. But the story of how that light spreads step by step, how it faces resistance and how it transforms the world. That is the story we will keep moving into, starting from the smallest point of origin. The deeper lesson is this: human beings cannot place themselves at the center of everything and still preserve lasting justice and lasting peace. Only by returning to divine guidance, by seeing ourselves as caretakers rather than absolute owners, can personal life and society regain balance. And in daily life today, that starts with very concrete choices. Taking responsibility for our actions, treating others with dignity, refusing to trade morality for short-term gain, and always asking ourselves whether what we are doing brings us and others closer to justice and mercy. If you want to keep going deeper into stories like this, stories about the prophets, the subtle lessons hidden inside events that feel distant, and how they connect directly to modern life, join the Prophetic History Explained community. This is where we learn together, reflect together, and connect sacred history with today's reality. And do not forget to subscribe to support us so we can keep bringing content that is this deep, rooted, and meaningful content that reaches the core of faith, history, and what it means to be human. The best stories are still ahead.